This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, everybody. Happy Monday. A lot coming at us this week, to say the least. We've got a market that seems to be looking like it is marking time because of so much coming at investors. I mean, what do we have going on? We've got a bunch of central bankers holding meetings, making calls on interest rates, including the ECB, the Bank of Japan, and, of course, the Federal Reserve.
Is it the last meeting for Jay Powell as Fed chair?
Is it?
I don't know. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, he's going to carry out his term, isn't he?
Well,
so when's the last meeting?
We'll see.
He's got the April, June, and I forget when he's done.
Okay. I think he's...
Is it May or June?
We're off to a good start.
It's a Monday, kids. All right, we're going to
Stuart Paul's going to be at 3 o'clock. We'll make sure to ask him.
We'll know. Also, we've got 5 of the so-called Mag 7 companies unveiling expected to unveil robust revenue gains as they continue to capitalize on their AI investments. So we're talking Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft. They are, though, facing rising margin and cost pressures that have been further intensified by the war in Iran. And that is still ongoing because it still feels like we didn't have peace talks this weekend. So we're going to try and read the room on that one.
Yeah, looking forward to that. That's certainly part of the backdrop and our focus this afternoon. Also our focus, the weekend in Washington that was. We're going to have a roundup, too, as King Charles of the UK visits. The war between the U.S. and Iran continuing as Iran and Russia get a little friendlier. Yeah,
we're really interested about that on Russia and Vladimir Putin's mission in all of this. Back with us is Angela Stent, former National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council. She also served in the U.S. Department of State, so she knows Mr. Putin pretty well. So we'll kind of get her read on this.
And on the markets, Kristy Akullian over at BlackRock. She's head of iShares investment strategy. She's going to be joining us on the market and the outlook.
And you've been really keen on this. A great column, opinion column by our own Thomas Black, why U.S. airlines need an M&A shakeup, not a bailout, which is interesting at a time when it seems like the value low-cost carriers are looking for some government assistance.
Is that the right move? That's the question mark.
I don't know. Capitalism versus bailout. These are debates that go on and on. All right, we're going to cover all of that in the next 60 minutes. Let's get a check on the markets for you on this Monday. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. We've got the Dow higher, S&P, Dow lower, S&P, NASDAQ. They're both advancing right now. S&P trading at a record. Any gain today for the S&P 500 index will be a new high. We're up 6 now at 71.71. That is a gain of just about 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 90, drop there of 0.2%. NASDAQ higher by 32 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, up 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 Index full of big tech names which report this week. That index trading lower by about 0.1%. The VIX right around 18 with the 10-year 4.33%, the 2-year 3.80%. Spot gold down $28 the ounce, $46.81, down by about 0.6%. We are seeing oil prices climb after efforts to resume peace talks over the Iran war stalled. Right now, West Texas Intermediate crude $96.85 a barrel, up by about 2.6%. Barrel of Brent $109.29, up by 3.8%. We are seeing oil stocks, the oil majors move lower. ExxonMobil down 0.4%. Chevron down 0.5%. ConocoPhillips right now down by about 0.8%. In case you're wondering, Jay Powell's term as Fed governor does run through January 2028. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pellet. Always with the facts. Appreciate that, Charlie.
Yeah.
Hey, we got a redhead, Carol, crossing the Bloomberg terminal just moments ago.
Yeah, we do. The man accused of attempting to carry out an attack on a Washington gala dinner on Saturday, of course, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He made his first appearance in federal court today. Cole Thomas Allen, 31, is his age, was, of course, as you know, I'm sure you've seen the video, wrestled to the ground outside of the ballroom at the Washington Hilton, where the Correspondents' annual dinner was taking place Saturday night. Administration officials have said Allen was trying to storm the event to target top U.S. officials, including President Trump, who was attending the event. The president and Vice President J.D. Vance were evacuated. The motives, the exact targets not known. We'll get more as we see this court appearance play out. We're also going to get an update, right, from the Department of Justice later.
Yeah, we're expecting that update to come in the 3 o'clock hour. We will bring that to you live as soon as it does begin. Carol, you mentioned that the target and motives weren't clear. He did send that lengthy manifesto to family members. That was seen by Bloomberg, where he appeared to blast the president as a, quote, traitor who committed crimes.
All right. So a lot going on, certainly, on this Monday. Hey, we want to get to kind of what's going on. You know, you've got that shooting, of course, at the dinner this past weekend. You also, of course, have the U.S. war in Iran still happening. Peace talks didn't seem to have another weekend of any kind of negotiations. You had German Chancellor's Friedrich Merz coming out saying the U.S. is being humiliated by Iranian leaders as President Trump struggles to negotiate an end to the war. And then you've got the Iranian foreign minister telling Russian President Vladimir Putin that bilateral relations will continue to be strengthened, according to Nair News. So it's interesting, just, you know, we were talking about on our planning call, just all the things that are kind of going on in the backdrop and trying to figure out when this war ends, especially as you have various Wall Street houses kind of upping their price targets for higher oil prices further and further out. I mean, it makes a difference. It impacts potentially global economies, energy markets, and a lot more.
There's certainly a lot for investors to wade through, a lot for the world to wade through. Fortunately, we got Ellen Milligan with us, Bloomberg News U.S. national security correspondent. She joins us from the Bloomberg Washington at D.C. bureau. Ellen, just Carol mentioned not everything, but a lot of what the focus has been at the White House over the last 24, 36, 48 hours and longer. What is the mood today right now?
Well, we've got the Iranian foreign minister in Russia to meet President Putin. European leaders have been pointing out the links between Russia and Iran in this conflict for quite some time, particularly on intelligence and targeting support. This meeting in Russia clearly points to the alliance there. And meanwhile, the talks have stalled between the US and Iran. On Friday, President Trump cancelled a planned visit by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to Pakistan to try and restart those negotiations. The visit that was meant to be made by J.D. Vance, the vice president, last week still hasn't been rescheduled. Axios is reporting that Iran has signalled that it's willing to do an interim deal on the Strait of Hormuz with negotiations on a nuclear agreement deferred till later. We've not yet had a response from the US on that, other than an acknowledgement of those reports. So we're still really in limbo.
You know, Ellen, what's interesting about that and this idea that negotiations of Iran's nuclear program could be dealt with later, as Axios reported, it makes you think, well, wait, wasn't that the reason to some extent that the U.S. went to war with Iran, right? We know it's also Israel has a role in here too in terms of the region, but if that's
I thought it was nuclear weapons.
Right. If that was the goal, then how can you really, I don't know, then what was this war for, certainly from the U.S. perspective?
Well, the declared goals have been changing since the beginning. At first it was regime change, then it was the imminent nuclear threat that we were told about, then it was about degrading the missile launchers, now it's about the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this is something analysts have been pointing out from the beginning. I mean, you'll remember the JCPOA took nearly 2 years to negotiate. It's an incredibly thorny, complicated issue. So that was the fact that could be wrapped up in weeks was always incredibly ambitious, incredibly unlikely. So this interim deal may well give hope that the Strait of Hormuz, which is the really pressing issue at the moment because it's roiling oil markets, it's causing real deep and probably long-standing economic shocks around the world. That is the imminent issue at the moment. And perhaps deferring the nuclear talks will mean that gets resolved quickly.
We want to get to King Charles' visit, but just one last question, just quickly, your thoughts on how close is Iran and Russia? What do we need to understand real quickly? We're going to talk about it a little bit in a moment with Angela Stent, who's written a book on Vladimir Putin and understands this relationship, but how close are they?
Yeah, I spoke to the UK Defence Secretary a month or so ago about this, and he kind of used this amazing phrase, which was that Putin's hidden hand is behind a lot of this conflict. Russia has been reliant on Iranian drones in Ukraine for some time. There have been reports, including from Bloomberg, about the sharing of intelligence, Russian intelligence, to help Iran target, for example, US sites in the Gulf. So yeah, this is a deep-rooted alliance that is often referred to as the axis of evil by Western leaders. They're very much intertwined, and I think this visit shows that.
It's a perfect segue to talk about the royal visit. King Charles set to start a 4-day state visit to Washington, to the White House. And I'm curious, Alan, this comes at a time when I think many could describe relations between the UK and the US as frayed. And for a lot of the reasons that you actually just mentioned, having to do with the Iran war. Talk about the backdrop there.
Yes, well, the president has long revered the king. I was there when he did his state visit to the UK in September. It was seen as a really kind of pivotal event that cemented relations between the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the president from two very opposing ideological backgrounds in terms of the politics, but were able to kind of create a really good rapport and a trusted relationship. That has fallen apart almost completely since this Iran conflict. I mean, really, it began with the president's threats to take Greenland at the start of the year, and the UK and all the other European allies, defending Denmark in that. But yeah, the UK decided not to join offensive strikes and not to support offensive strikes against Iran. They have actually been allowing the US to use their bases in the UK and in Diego Garcia to launch what they describe as defensive strikes, refueling capabilities, logistics. Right. So they have actually been providing, including intelligence support. But yeah, the president has been hurling insults, really personal insults at the prime minister for a number of months now.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see these meetings, how they go and what comes out of them. Ellen, thank you. Great update and really appreciate it. Ellen Milligan, she's Bloomberg News U.S. national security correspondent, joining us from our D.C. bureau. All right. Let's get a read on the markets.
And let's head to San Francisco to Kristy Akullian, head of the iShares investment strategy for the Americas at BlackRock, $4.3 trillion in assets under management. Kristy, always good to have you on the program. I just want to start with this macro backdrop and sort of what you're seeing when it comes to flows in different ETFs right now and how that's reflecting this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be back. We've seen a little bit of a shift since the start of the year. I think coming into this year, the story was all about this pro-cyclical rotation and maybe a rotation from the US into the rest of the world. In terms of where we're seeing flows right now, though, we are seeing investors take down cash, and we're seeing a strong intent to do that in both flows and polling data that we have. And they're adding to US equities. So it's a little bit more of the playbook that we saw from the last couple of years rather than a stark shift. They're adding to US equities, they're adding to tech, and that aligns with sort of where we see some of the best opportunities, some of the best earnings growth as we're really in the middle of earnings season right now as well.
Where are they taking money out?
Yeah. So, again, we're seeing a real pull down in terms of cash. I think investors and particularly the financial advisor community had built up more cash reserves earlier this year. There was some hesitation around allocating over March because of some of the geopolitical conflict. But the biggest subtractions we're seeing are from cash in the portfolio. Biggest additions, a really big swing back into U.S. equities. So we're seeing flows be a little bit more balanced between value and growth. And we're seeing investors really reach for more of that AI exposure, even though at the beginning of the year, they maybe were more concerned about valuations and concentration. So seeing targeted there.
Well, is the cash that's being pulled, is it coming from money market funds? Is it going into, I know you said it's going into certain equity funds, but is some of it going into any bond funds right now? And the reason I ask is because we've been trying to figure out where all the cash, the trillions of dollars in cash that's on the sidelines in money market funds ends up going and when.
Yeah, and we've been talking about that for a while, right? There was a lot of dry powder on the sidelines. There were record highs almost every month in terms of the money market flows. So yes, we've seen some money come out of there. We've seen, a rebalance, though, in terms of the flows we've seen into the ETF market. So March was very strong into fixed income. That's cooled actually quite a bit in favor of equities so far this in April. Within fixed income, it was strong allocations into short-dated funds. But now, again, we're seeing more risk appetite. I think, one set of flows really sort of proves the point in terms of how focused investors are right now. We're on track for the largest ever month of flows into semiconductor ETFs and one of the largest outflow months for equal weighted ETFs in about 20 years. So investors are reaching for tech with both hands, something like BAI, which is our BlackRock AI ETF, really proving the point there as well.
How much momentum picked up as we saw, obviously we saw a market pullback at the start of the war. How much of the activity happened in the last week or two? Is it like, we talked a lot about short covering in general for pushing a lot of share prices higher, but I'm just curious, has it been steady over the last month? Has it picked up in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's picked up in the last couple of weeks. So we've trended to see investor sentiment, again, sort of citing some of the polling data that we have from our very large and broad investor base. We saw sentiment bottom around the third week of March. And so at that time, we had seen really strong flows into fixed income funds, especially short-dated funds there. And then it's rebounded very sharply in line with market performance. So we're seeing investors, see better entry points and lower valuations to some of the themes that they want to hold for the long term. So I think the valuation reset that obviously happened, we saw prices come down even while earnings were still being revised higher. So, we're about 40% of the S&P 500 is going to report earnings this week. Expectations are really strong coming into earnings season. It's the highest in 5 years. We're expecting about 14 or 15% growth year over year. So I think investors are really following the fundamentals, and the fundamentals are pointing to strong U.S. relative to the rest of the world and strong growth and strong tech. And so, I think that those are some of the themes that we've really highlighted in our spring outlook as well.
Strong U.S. relative to the rest of the world, but what are you seeing outside of the U.S. in terms of flows, and where do you think the opportunities are?
Yeah, we have a preference right now for emerging markets over developed markets. I think a lot of the preference for the U.S. really stems from, we came into the conflict in the Middle East from more of a position of strength in terms of macro data. The U.S.'s position as a net oil exporter or energy exporter obviously helps. So I think it's on a relative basis, we see the U.S. holding up better. But emerging markets have really captured investor attention as sort of the next leg of this AI theme. So if you want exposure to AI, which is, growing companies that are growing earnings phenomenally quickly, it's not just a U.S. story anymore. So we see investors looking for more diversification, even within something like the AI theme, which they're adding more to in their portfolios.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Hey, listen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Kristy Akullian, BlackRock Head of iShares Investment Strategy for the Americas, as we said, $4.3 trillion in assets under management, joining us out there from the West Coast. We have a headline crossing.
Yeah, we do. Boaz Weinstein's Blue Owl BDC tender draws under 1% of shares. Weinstein's Saba had tender offer for Blue Owl Capital Corp. 2. Investors in a Blue Owl Capital Inc. fund tendered less than 1% of shares to Saba Capital Management and Cox Capital Partners. The tender offer for shares, Carol, in Blue Owl Capital Corp. 2 expired with limited take-up. It wasn't extended. That's according to people familiar with the matter.
Got to say that scant sales to Saba and Cox suggest that investors are preferring to hold on to their shares rather than cash out now at far less than full value. And that is the play here, right? The risk reward. Like maybe you hold on and everything maybe doesn't get worse, or there aren't the concerns. Sometimes it just needs a longer term to cash out those investments. We say these aren't very liquid. It takes some time. We saw really coming out of the pandemic with the interest rate environment changing, it has taken a lot of the exits a lot longer to actually happen. Yeah,
our team, Olivia Fishlow and Ryan Gould, writing that Weinstein was buying pessimism as he looked to snap up shares at what was expected to be a greater than 20% discount.
All right, we talked about the alliance between Iran and Russia. We're going to get a little bit more into that next.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks holding near a record at the start of a busy week for tech earnings. S&P higher by 9 right now at 71.74, up by 0.1%. Any advance today on the S&P will be a new record. The Dow, however, remains lower, down 68, down 0.1%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up by 47 points, up 0.2. The NASDAQ 100 index, full of big tech names, little change, down under 0.1%. The VIX right around 18 with a 10-year, 4.33%. Gold is down $25 the ounce to $46.38, down 0.5%. But the big commodity story, the rise in crude oil, 96.74 right now on WTI, up 2.5%. Barrel of Brent, 108.82 now, up by 3.3%. Qualcomm shares higher on speculation about a potential open AI phone. Shares up 0.5%. After earnings, Verizon up 2.5%. Rivals T-Mobile down 2.3%. AT&T down by 1.4%. Cole Thomas Allen has been charged with trying to kill President Trump during an attack on a Washington gala dinner over the weekend. He made his first appearance in federal court today, also being charged with gun offenses. Recapping, S&P at a record, up 10 right now, up 0.1%. Carol and Tim, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, we mentioned this earlier. Charlie, thank you. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi telling Russian President Vladimir Putin that bilateral relations will continue to be strengthened. This is according to Nair News. President Putin expressed hopes that Iranian people under management of the new leader will overcome this difficult period of tests and the peace will come. Russian state television showed all of this in a live broadcast footage of the meeting, which we think is just kind of interesting against everything else that's going on.
Yeah, we were talking about this on our editorial call, and we said we got to speak to Angela Stent about this. She's senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She's also the author of many books, including Putin's World, Russia Against the West, and With the Rest. She's a former national intelligence officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council. She served too, Carol, in the Office of Policy Planning at the U.S. Department of State.
So, Angela, come on in. Tim and I have been talking about this a lot. What caught our attention was, this Iranian foreign minister meeting up with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a previous segment, our own Ellen Milligan, who covers national security here, in talking with a British official, she said, what they are hearing is President Putin's hidden hand is behind a lot of this conflict. How do you see it?
Well, certainly Russia has been backing Iran since the United States and Israel attacked Iran. It's been providing the Iranians with intelligence on American targets, among other things. It's been providing the Iranians with an updated version of the Shahed drones, which the Iranians first provided the Russians to use in Ukraine. Russians have now modernized them, so they've been giving them weapons. And so they've certainly been backing them. And of course, Russia has been really benefiting from this war because of high oil prices and because the sanctions on Russian oil have been waived for 1 month by the United States and then just for a second month. So the Russian economy isn't doing that well, but they're certainly benefiting from this economically. On the other hand, Putin doesn't want to alienate President Trump. He still wants the president to force Ukraine to give up territory to Russia that Russia doesn't control. So for Putin, it's a balancing act, but he's really trying to show that Russia is still a player in the Middle East, having certainly lost out in Venezuela, of course, in Syria, before all of this happened. So he's playing this, I would say, pretty well at the moment.
So, Dr. Stent, you think he's successfully showing the world that Russia is a player in the Middle East, at least a player in Iran right now?
I think he is. I mean, Russia has certainly lost some of its clout in the Middle East because of events over the past couple of years. And certainly because the US and Israel were able to do this without obviously informing Russia. So I think what Russia is trying to do also is to show, yes, we're still here. We may be, bogged down in Ukraine on the one hand, but we're still a player in the Middle East. So it's kind of And I think the other thing we have to remember is that Russia has also cultivated good ties with the Gulf states. It's got the OPEC plus with Saudi Arabia and other countries. And so it's a little bit difficult for Russia to the extent that these Gulf partners of Russia have now been attacked by Iran. And as we've seen, these Gulf partners are now signing agreements with Ukraine to give them the technology to improve their, to improve their own drones.
So what does the investing public, the U.S. public, need to understand about this relationship between Iran and Russia in particular? Because I'm also wondering, how does Russia complicate any U.S. efforts towards a ceasefire?
Well, I think they have to understand that this is still an important partnership for Russia.
And will stay that way, Angela? Will stay that way?
I think it will stay that way because the Iranians are going to probably be more dependent on Russia, depending on how all of this works out at the end. So, yes, that's there to say. And as long as the Russians support the Iranians, they've also been able to push back against the U.S. Now we're in a ceasefire period. Straits of Hormuz are obviously closed, but that partnership is going to remain. Yes. Has
this war been net good for Russia, apart from the higher oil prices, the sanctions easing, but also on its own war and its invasion of Ukraine? Attention has shifted from that part of the world in Eastern Europe to the Middle East right now. How does Putin view that internally?
Yeah, I think that's also a bonus for Russia. The U.S. has turned its attention away from that conflict. So I said before that, the Russians would like Trump to force Zelensky to give up territory. That I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So from the Russian point of view, it's okay not to have the U.S. involved in negotiations at the moment, because they can just continue to, what they're trying to do is to take back more territory. They're not doing very well at the moment. Ukrainians are doing much better. But yes, I think for them, it's a bonus that attention has turned away from that conflict.
Angela, does Russia want the uranium, the enriched uranium?
I think it does. So in 2015, they took the enriched uranium after the Obama administration had agreed on the JCPOA, that agreement with Iran that the Russians were also involved with. So the Russians would be quite happy to take that. But of course, so far, the Trump administration has said that it doesn't accept that. And I think President Trump has said he wants the U.S. to take it.
Over the last few years, when we've had a chance to talk to you, we've asked you how you think the war between Russia's invasion of Ukraine will end. I'm going to ask you now about the war between the U.S. and Iran, and certainly Israel there as well. How does that war end?
That's a much more difficult one because there has been regime change in Iran, but you have a regime that's, even more radicalized. And Iran so far looks as if it's done pretty well out of this conflict, despite the assassinations and the loss of weapons and things like that, because it's now controlling the Straits of Hormuz. So I think in the end, there are negotiations. There'll have to be more negotiations, but I think it's unlikely that the Iranians are going to, say that they will totally give up their nuclear weapons program. And in the end, you may have to come back to an agreement that's somewhat similar to the JCPOA, the agreement that the Trump administration pulled out in its first term. Yeah. Maybe it'll have somewhat different terms, but just trying to restrict the pace at which Iran can develop a nuclear weapons system.
And just let's not forget China's out there too, who of course is allied with Iran and Russia, no doubt about it. Angela, thank you so much. So glad we could do this with you once again. Angela Stent, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Her book, Putin's World, Russia Against the West and with the Rest. She's a former National Intelligence Officer for Russia and Eurasia at the National Intelligence Council. She also served in the Office of Policy Planning at the U.S. Department of State, which is just so many reasons why we lean on her for this.
We also lean on Myles Miller. He's Bloomberg News senior national reporter, and he joins us here in the Bloomberg Businessweek studio. The reason we are talking to Myles for a couple of reasons. One, in just about 30 minutes, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, FBI Director Kash Patel, U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro will hold a press conference at the DOJ following the initial appearance in federal court of the suspected White House Correspondents' Dinner gunman. That suspect has been charged with trying to assassinate the president. What's the latest?
Yeah, so we expect to get the formal complaint in just a few moments now, just about what they've learned from doing their checks on his background, checks in his room.
And he's not cooperating with authorities.
He's not cooperating with authorities. What we know is that he traveled cross-country from California on train, brought weapons with him, and really, I mean, you see the video, he charged through the magnetometer there. Now, they have a very layered security plan. We have a story coming out shortly on the terminal that really talks about how the Secret Service plans for all of this. Now, you know, to us who were in the room, it may seem like a situation while we just walked through a magnetometer, we took the things out of our pockets and put them down, and, you know, that may look like lax security, but it's the stuff you don't see. All of the folks who are in who were in the stairways. There were folks there, speaking to a source, who may look like they're a waiter, but actually is Secret Service. And some of those folks dropped their trays and pulled out guns and were able to, you know, to start getting their people out of there.
Safe to say, I mean, there's always a lot of security at this event. Typically, the president's there, but President Trump has not been there since his return or his first term in the White House. So this was a different event. And I think about that change, and it seems like they were prepared. And I guess we're going to get an update on safety also in terms of coverage there.
Right. Yeah. You know, it was the first time Trump had been back in some time, and I spoke to his folks about that, and they said,
as president, never, right?
Right.
First as president.
The reason was because of America 250. He wanted to be able to show a unified front. You saw the cabinet secretaries there. They actually walked in with the cabinet secretary I cover, Mark Wayne Mullen, and they had their security around them, but it did not feel like it was onerous. And I've been in some of those events, and I asked the Secret Service, so why wasn't this a national security event? And they said, because there are so many things that go into planning this. This hotel, which has been nicknamed the Hinckley Hotel after the shooting of Ronald Reagan, has so many hidden features for the president that make it a sort of an interesting place to do this. But when you are one of those people who are in the room, you know, who was under the table like I was, you start thinking, okay, you know, was this secure? But you have to remember, the Secret Service's mission is to protect the president and to protect their protectees. But it's the bonus that we get the protection as well.
But for all intents and purposes, I mean, despite the fact that the gunman was able to get close and there were shots fired, the Secret Service did its job and did keep everybody safe.
Right. I mean, they stopped him on the first floor. You know, he charged, then they stopped him. And, you know, in speaking to this source earlier today, he's like, if he would have gone down the stairs, he'd meet even more firepower. Every level you go to, you get more and more firepower, and you get more and more, agents. And so it's mentally, because you're there and you're in shock, you think, okay, was I safe? But it's the things that you don't see that kind of make you really think and go, oh, wow, you know, the waiter thing is just, you know, and Trump said that at the press conference on Saturday, and people did not pick up on that. He said, people sitting at your table that you didn't know, you probably didn't know that they were an agent.
It takes me back to 9/11, and like after 9/11, that you would have someone on the plane that was
still do have air marshals.
Officer. Yeah, I assume they are, right? And so
never met one.
No, never met one. But
I know of an active air marshal. Let's just say that.
All right, Myles Miller, thank you so much. Of course, he's Bloomberg News senior national reporter. As we head to a break, we do have the King and Queen of the United Kingdom landed at Joint Base Andrews. We are, of course, talking about King Charles and Queen Camilla. They will be meeting with President Trump at the White House. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Just getting word from Rogers Communications out of Toronto that it is offering buyouts to half its staff. That word from the Toronto Globe and Mail. And again, we are getting word that Rogers offering buyouts to half of its staff. U.S. stocks trading mixed right now with the S&P 500 index at a record. Any advance today will be a new high on the S&P. 71.75 where we stand now, up by 10 points. That is a gain of 0.1%. Dow Industrials down 40, a drop there of under 0.1%. NASDAQ up 38 for the NASDAQ Composite Index, a gain of 0.1%. But in a divergence, we are seeing the NASDAQ 100 index full of big tech names, trading lower by 0.1%. Our Mag 7 index ahead of earnings this week. 5 out of the 7 names will be reporting on Wednesday and Thursday. That index up now by 0.7%. The VIX below 19 with a 10-year 4.33%, the 2-year 3.79%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.1%, 96.43 a barrel. Barrel of Brent 108.23, up now by 2.7%. Again, recapping here, U.S. stocks trading mixed with the S&P up 0.1%. Again, Rogers Communications reportedly offering buyouts to half its staff. I'm Charlie Pellet. Carol and Tim, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol, Massar, Tim Stenovec, live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. So a lot of airline news that's been coming at us lately.
We've got our eye on an airplane at Joint Base Andrews right now.
We do. King Charles and Queen Camilla of the UK have landed there, and they will be headed to the White House. So there's a live shot. We're just waiting, of course, the flags of the UK. You can see clearly, and just waiting for the door to pop open. They are going to be greeted by the U.S. Chief of Protocol, Monica Crowley, and British Ambassador to the UK, Sir Christian Turner. So just keeping a watch on that, because that is also on the agenda in the nation's capital, and of course for the President of the United States.
Well, speaking of planes, United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby confirmed that he approached American Airlines and that talks have ended. This after laying out the virtues of a merger that he said could have strengthened corporate America and won approval from regulators. Kirby published a lengthy statement on why it all made sense despite questions, or rather opposition, from the White House and American.
Right. And then you've got budget airlines there asking the Trump administration for about $2.5 billion in financial assistance to help combat increasing jet fuel prices. And then you've got, of course, maybe something going on with a rescue for Spirit Aviation from the U.S. government. Got to point out on Spirit, Scott Kirby, CEO of United, had some thoughts on that when he spoke with Bloomberg's Lisa Abramowitz on April 22nd.
The problems at Spirit predate the run-up in fuel. This was a fundamentally flawed business model that I've been on there, going back into the last administration, saying it's going to fail because the business model doesn't work. And so I think the spike in fuel prices just moves it forward by a couple of months.
All right, Scott Kirby, CEO of United, speaking with Lisa Abramowitz of Bloomberg. That was back on April 22nd.
Well, writing about the industry, Thomas Black, a Bloomberg opinion columnist, he writes about the industrial and transportation sectors. Previously, a Bloomberg News reporter covering logistics, manufacturing, private aviation. He joins us this afternoon from Dallas. So you write this column that got our attention about how U.S. airlines, they don't need a bailout, in your view. They need an M&A shakeup. Why?
Well, we have 4 large airlines that serve the full service market. And then we have the low cost airlines that are in disarray. My argument is that we need a low cost champion, and we shouldn't look at the low cost industry as needing competition within that space itself. There should be one low cost champion that competes with these 4 large airlines.
What does it take to be a low cost champion? Because it looks like it's a really challenging place to be if you're not one of the big 4 airlines right now, because these big 4 airlines are offering those lower cost options to consumers, whether you call it basic economy or whatever. It does seem like they have that product.
They do, but they also have to have feeder airlines. A lot of them have regional feeder airlines that feed into a hub so that you can get on to your destination. So you're having to change a plane, essentially, at a big hub, whereas a low-cost carrier can offer you a direct flight. So that's one of their competitive advantages. But they need scale. A low-cost carrier has to have scale so that can drive costs down.
I mean, the reality of, Thomas, I always think about this, and I think was it Warren Buffett who had some really strong thoughts about the airline industry. I mean, man, it's expensive. Planes are expensive. Fuel is expensive. People are expensive. I mean, I say this all the time. I sit in a plane and I think about, okay, how much is everybody roughly paying? How do they make money? By consolidating, is it easier for airlines to make money and be profitable?
Yeah, scale helps you drive down all kinds of costs, maintenance costs, anything that you buy in bulk can be driven down from, uniforms and stuff like that. And then buying planes, when you're buying, 50 or 100 planes, you're going to get a much better deal than if you're buying, 10 planes. So the scale can help you drive down costs. Again, in that lower cost market that we had one airline that graduated from that, which was Southwest, but they have a unique real estate play, right? They're in these secondary airports that nobody was paying attention to, and they carved out that market niche, and they graduated not quite into a full service airline. That's what they're trying to do right now with this big transformation. So there is that space for a low cost carrier. But they have to fly bare bones. I think people are willing to take a bare bones flight if they can, get a pretty cheap ticket.
If the U.S., Thomas, were to provide some sort of bailout or some sort of lifeline to these ultra low cost carriers, would that be throwing good money after bad?
It could be, yes. I think the key again is consolidation. Frontier and Spirit had a deal to merge. Unfortunately, there was another airline that kind of butted in and drove up the price, and the deal fell apart. Well, there was a deal, and then the DOJ squashed it. But I do think that those two airlines can consolidate and try to build some scale there and have that low cost the option, right? Because if you don't have that low cost option, then suddenly the full service airlines don't have any kind of brakes on raising prices in that main cabin seat. So right now they can drive down that main cabin seat price and kind of subsidize it with what they're making at the front of the plane.
Yeah.
So that makes it very difficult for the low-cost carrier.
Thomas, just got about 30, 40 seconds here. Big mistake if the U.S. government does some kind of bailout of Spirit or some kind of financial assistance to these lower discount value airlines. Is that a mistake in your view?
Now, they might have to bail them out just to keep them afloat, but I wouldn't want the government taking a stake in operating airline. I don't think that fits within our capitalist model.
Yeah, it does. It's hard to get my head around it too. If you believe in capitalism, right? Stuff goes down, then new.
And the government's not a very good operator of companies.
new airlines come on. Hey, Thomas, we've been dying to talk to you about your column, so thank you so much. We know it's later where you are. Actually, it's early where you are. I was thinking you were in London. I don't know why I thought he was in London. Maybe it's because the British King's here. Thomas Black is Bloomberg Opinion columnist. He's joining us from Dallas, where it's actually earlier on this Monday. All right, folks, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec. We are here in our New York studios, but we're keeping an eye on Joint Base Andrews because we have the King of the United Kingdom, King Charles, along with his wife, Queen Camilla. They have landed moments ago, and the door is open, and we're expecting them to come out any moment. Yeah,
just moments ago, they rolled out the red carpet literally for them, as much of the staff actually got off from the back of the plane. We're looking at a shot of the front of the plane right now. Again, King Charles III has arrived in the U.S. for a visit fraught with doubts about the future of Britain's so-called special relationship with America and fresh security concerns in the wake of the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Yeah, keep in mind, President Trump has threatened to reopen a trade deal that the two nations signed last year, and he withdrew his support for their prime minister and his plan to give up a strategic island chain the Indian Ocean. There, of course, for those who are listening on radio right now, we do have King Charles, the 77-year-old monarch of the United Kingdom, along with his wife, Queen Camilla, carefully coming down those airline stairs. They're never easy. It's a big staircase. And he and his team and entourage are expected to be greeted by the U.S. Chief of Protocol, Monica Crowley, and the British Ambassador to the United Kingdom, Sir Christian Turner. And they are, of course, making their way down that line.
They landed at Joint Base Andrews this afternoon. It's the start of this 4-day trip. As you mentioned, Carol, the first state visit to the U.S. since becoming king back in 2022. You mentioned that its diplomatic mission has taken on new urgency right now. And we can see the king and the queen right now greeting members of this delegation on the red carpet at Joint Base Andrews.
It's all kind of interesting considering America is about to celebrate its 250th birthday, an anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence from British rule. But it is kind of an awkward backdrop because the relationship between, safe to say, one of the United States' oldest allies and trusted allies, it has not been a very comfortable relationship, even as American warplanes have been taking off from English bases en route to the Middle East. So there's things that are going on that would say otherwise, but we know it's a little bit of a strained relationship.
Yeah, it's perhaps the lowest point going back about 70 years to the Suez Crisis in the 1950s. The president and the first lady, for their part, will greet the royal couple at the South Portico of the White House. That'll happen a little later this afternoon. The plan, they will share afternoon tea together and tour an expanded beehive at the president's official residence before the king and queen depart for a garden party at the British ambassador's residence.
You might recall that the king, he is into environmental concerns in a big way. And I think farming and gardening have been things that are certainly of interest to him. So that kind of fits in line. All right, folks, we will continue to monitor as they make their way through that line. And then, of course, they are headed to D.C. and, of course, the White House. So something we'll keep a watch on and look for any commentary that comes out of meetings between certainly the king and the queen as they get ready to meet President Trump and, of course, his wife, the First Lady.